The systems from William Barr and his insurrection actively contract with universities, such as, but is not limited to, his arrangements with Sam Harris and the other distractions who actively peddling fraud for their Marxist insurrection systematically apply the Druid religion as an state established religion in order to establish the government loyal to the Confederacy as God without remedy to secrets conducted by the Confederacy, otherwise known as a KKK spell, which manufactures are exponential, catastrophic, permanent series reproducible threats against the public, as they are enemies of war to the United States public. And being guilty of this treason, have actively peddled frauds such as Sam Harris's uh, genetic guilt, which peddles the false assertions that people are born into a genetic morality, and that position allows them, similar to all of their other fraudulent forensics, to exponentially remove all of their political adversaries threatening the existence of the Confederacy as they systematically corrupt the system under the strategies of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, materializing the inevitable eradication of all American loyal systems until there is nothing except for the white nationalist systematic racism. And this system being derived by those Druids are satanic religious radicals. And those religious radicals can have all kinds of distractions. They can say that they're Christians because they go to church, but going to church doesn't make you any more Christian than being in a garage makes you a car. There's nothing to do with it. The two things are incompatible, as their act of war against God is a permanent state of contempt and hatred for all things biblical in the service to the God of nature. And anything that reminds them of that morality, such as the laws of nature, which assert that you have to protect your clan, you have to protect your pack, you have to protect your own society, and act as a functional unit, is actively rejected in favor of their magic frauds as they systematically steal and subvert each other through all things defined in the Bible as what God hates. In their sorceries, they eradicate through their contempt for God all things derived by God's handiwork. And their active malice towards those things increases the value of their abuses towards anything that reminds them more of that law of God. So anything closer to that, such as children, will actively be targeted for more malicious abuses because of the core identity of the insurrectionists is God-hating psychopaths. Now, their sales and distributions of these higher value interests facilitates the high priority targets, which are sold and distributed on the black market for the ultimate criminal abuses at the service of the Confederate satanic system at war with God as their core social contract identity. The reproductions of the KKK's Druid religion has actively studied the magic systems and extortions around the world historically, and that includes the system of the black market for the distribution of the witch doctor system, which facilitates their criminal lusts for the pursuit of these illegal systems.
I think that this is a business. not to say something that's going to make sure I'm never hired again. It's unscripted. It really is unscripted. I think there's like this massive misconception that men at Chelsea, in US Essex, they're given this kind of script before they're filmed, and they are not. They really are not.
No, and you're right. I don't want to prod you on that, because I don't want to get you in trouble.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. But this is the thing. So I mean, it's fairly reality show, fairly superficial. But a lot of us love it, and I enjoy watching it myself. And you do learn a bit about society and things. But how did you get involved in the kind of activism that you've been doing that we're going to talk about today?
Well, do you know, there's this thing about the word activism that just sounds a bit, I want to say poncy, but I don't. It sounds like activism is kind of like saved for the middle class, very posh-loaded kids who are rebelling against their really loaded parents, and I'm just not that at all. So I would not consider myself an activist. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's not that at all.
We need another word.
We need, yeah. I don't know. What would you suggest?
Impactful stuff.
I don't know. I think it got to a point where I was working and enjoying my job, but feeling a little bit kind of like there could be something else kind of out there, and I wanted a bit of a change. And I reached out to a lady who ran a baby's home in Uganda, and she sort of often looked for needed TV people to go over there and shoot films and edit them and stuff. And I very quickly agreed, and went to Uganda. Well, I think it was only supposed to be about 3 months, and I ended up staying 6 or 7 in the first instance. And at this baby's home, which is a little bit like it's somewhere in between a baby's home and a rescue centre. There are children there from the ages of like 0 to 11, 12, who have been either found abandoned or rescued from their homes and brought to this baby's home, and they try and basically find Ugandan families to adopt these kids. And there was one girl there who had, I was told, survived child sacrifice, and it was through her and the organisation that I learned quite a lot about what this practice is and the effects it's had on the country.
Was that a shock for you to learn about? I mean, did you know that existed?
Not specifically child sacrifice. I knew that there was such things as the occult, and I knew about witchcraft through my dad, who's Nigerian, but I hadn't ever heard about like sacrifice. I'd heard obviously like there are sacrifices that are made, but it's always to do with animals and chickens and
caregiving. I love going in and energy. Caregiving, or helping to be.
goats, which is very, very common, but never had I heard of humans being sacrificed, and certainly not children.
Yeah, it's really quite unnerving and scary. I thought the same as you, and I thought it was maybe like, I don't know, a wives' tale, or maybe even like a xenophobic thing about these other countries where that happens. I suppose is it embarrassing for a lot of people from those countries that this goes on? Are people in these countries, in the cities, are they aware of this happening?
Do you know what? I wouldn't say embarrassed. I think there's obviously a lot of shame, right? There's a lot of shame. I think people do realise it's happening. You can't not. However, it's not so much a taboo subject, right? People aren't open about it unless you really ask questions. And I found when I heard about this and I went researching, people were really kind of hesitant at first to talk about it, but it only took a little bit of digging and scratching the surface, and they would just unearth all of these awful stories that they were so obviously keen to talk about and needed for themselves, to explain to someone, even though I was a foreigner, what was happening in their country, because it felt to me as though they'd never been asked, yet they really wanted to communicate this horror that was happening all around them. So, do people know about it? Yes. People are willing to talk about it, but you just got to ask questions and ask the right questions.
Is it a horror for everyone? Because I guess some of these people are carrying out the practice. So for those people, did you speak to any of those people, and were they sort of defending the practice?
No, of course, actually, weirdly, there are people who clearly are involved in this who are desperate to get out. It probably wasn't a fight that I was able to take on at the time, but in hindsight, I wish I had paid a bit more attention to that. And there's no way in hell I'll be able to find it now.
You know, hindsight is one of those things as a journalist, isn't it? It's impossible. There's so many leads, aren't there? And you just can't possibly handle all of them.
Yeah.
You spoke of parents, losing their children. I mean, so would is it often that one sacrifices one's own
luckily a security guard had seen what was going on, stopped it, and called the babies home while I was working. And yeah, she was brought to the baby's home. But she, I think, was one of the cases where it was the parents who had ordered that, because there was a nationwide appeal for her parents to, does anybody know this girl? Her picture was everywhere, all over the news and newspapers, and nobody came forward. And we suspected that her parents could have been involved in that. But it was awful. She was really quite a shell of a human being when I met her. She was just terrified and visibly traumatized, and I just loved her instantly, and I just wanted to learn about the practice that nearly killed her. And yeah, we just got really, really close, and I'm still in touch with her now.
Did she start to recover upon being with you and back to sort of normal life?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, very, gradually.
What's she up to now?
So she's now living with a teacher who's fantastic. She's got 2 brothers, living in a really nice house in a village, surrounded by pigs and sheep, not sheep, sorry, pigs and chicken and mango trees. She's flourishing. I'm going to see her next month.
Oh wow! She must love you though. You must see these. I mean, how old is she now?
Well, we think that she was obviously she didn't come with documentation, right? But we think that she's probably about 10 now, or 9. She just makes it out every year. She's like, I think I'm 7 or 8 or 9. Yeah. But her birthday's the 1st of July, so I think her parents picked that as it's, easy middle of the year.
And I suppose that security guard saved her life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And about a year after, I sort of started digging around and wanted to learn a bit more about her case, and I went to the police station where the case was reported, and they had lost the case files. So nothing exists on who found her or anything, because that's what I wanted to do next.
What do you think that might mean, that they've lost them?
I think it could mean lots of things. Lots of cases go missing, and to be honest with you, I can't say, and I wouldn't like to speculate.
What's Kampala like? And is that where this is mostly going on, or is it the rest of Uganda?
It happens normally in the villages. There's particular districts where it's particularly prevalent, but it also happens in Kampala. But on the whole, Kampala is a wonderful, wonderful city. When I first got there, I just instantly felt at home.
Things. And a lot of it is apparently to do with our evolutionary psychology, that if you watch horrible things happening, horrible things, it might help you to practice and to know what to avoid yourself. You see someone getting eaten or killed in the wild or whatever, by watching it, it gives you dopamine in your brain or something, it makes you want to watch it, and then you know how to avoid that kind of thing. That's probably why we like public executions and public hangings and stuff back in the day. Do you think there's anything to that in the child sacrifice? I mean, is there ever a group of witnesses watching?
What do you mean? Okay. Is it a spectator?
Like a public
thing?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
No.
This is
very
completely
private, and absolutely secretive and secluded, and behind walls or within bushes. No, absolutely not.
Do you think it might also just speak to humans? I mean, what does it say to you about humans? Are we naturally violent? Are we suppressing our violence and then using excuses sometimes to be violent?
I don't think it's as deep as that, if I'm honest. I think that this is a business. I think that there are those who are not just in Uganda, but various different countries in Africa and in India too, who have realised that there is big, big money in convincing people that sacrificing a child will make them rich.
money, where is the money in all of this? Because obviously we've got what's happening is, you know, because for prosperity and luck and things. So what's with the money here?
So obviously, a witch doctor is paid for their services, and the ultimate, one of the most expensive things to ask a witch doctor to do or provide for you is the sacrifice of a child. So this can cost anywhere from about £200, which isn't very much to us, but it's a huge amount to a particular witch doctor, and can rise to thousands and thousands. So children are murdered for money, and it's not just the witch doctor who are paid. Obviously, it's the person who abducts the child. It's the person who goes out to buy the utensils to cut the child. It's such a network. And you've got the driver, you've got the person who obtains the phones to make to communicate with those involved. So yes, it's a very, very profitable business.
Is it like a mafia? And are there famous witch doctors? I suppose because it's so illegal, they've got to hide, I guess.
There are, but you've got to be quite careful when you there are witch doctors and traditional healers, right? Witch doctors are those who are carrying out witchcraft and appeasing ancestral spirits, not necessarily carrying out child sacrifice, but it's the witch doctors who are carrying out child sacrifice, amongst other things. And then you've got traditional healers who are, medicine men and women, and they use traditional herbs to cure ailments and illnesses, and they're very reputable. So sometimes, those lines are blurred, and the traditional healers, especially in Uganda, get a really bad name for themselves because of the reputation of witch doctors who are carrying out these hideous acts.
Was this, when you got there, was this legal?
No. So it's always been illegal to sacrifice a child, murder a child, but the issue was that defendants were being charged using the penal code, which did not carry an adequate sentence, in my opinion. And there were significant loopholes in not just the penal code, but the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act, that made it really, really easy for people who are carrying out this crime to be let off. For example, if there was a case of a child who was kept in a shrine and she was gradually sacrificed, and instead of just removing her body parts and leaving her to die, she was born for the purpose of sacrifice. So over the years, she was, they would remove a fingernail, it would grow back, and then remove it again. They would remove her earlobes, teeth, pull out hair. By the time I met her, she couldn't hear, she couldn't see, she couldn't speak. She's in a wheelchair. It's awful. So the guys who did that to her were charged with kidnap and torture, and were given a ridiculously low sentence. So our law has that provision of gradual sacrifice, and it carries a really, really high sentence. So we have thought of every single possible scenario that is involved in sacrificing a child, from the moment that call is made to the murder of that child. Every single stage has a crime attached to it. But he had been, this poor little boy has been living with, they removed his penis, they castrated him, and tried to cut his head off. So he's got this huge scar here, and he went to Australia for surgery, funded by charity, and they did what they could. But he was living in the same community as the man who attacked him, and he couldn't do anything because at the time a child's eyewitness account was not enough to secure a conviction. So this guy's now behind bars.
so above, which is half of principle of correspondence. Obviously, with the dialectic, we're also talking about the principle of polarity, and with the action, reaction, problem, reaction, solution, we're talking about the pendulum. So rhythm. Polarity is the basis of the dialectic, rhythm is the basis of its operation, correspondence is their key magic tool. Their magic works for the principle of correspondence. The Hermetic principle of correspondence is sometimes, in fancy pants New Age strap, called the law of attraction.
At which point you have to understand that the system of the Druids is applying the snake that eats its own head and tail as intertwined, such as in the Neverending Stories key pendant with the two snakes eating each other's tails. It simulates the position that the capitalism is eating the communism. And the problem is that that had started from a position from Chaos's investment, or call sign Chaos, from the Confederacy to create a corrupt system for the Confederates as an alternative to the FBI Nazis overthrowing the United States government. Uh, the block and trade by using their same words, by falling into the spell and using their words, they complied with the position of using the corruption from the white nationalists, at which points they actively engaged in the communism for the social engineering of the targeted communities, such as the black community, who are actively being destabilized and terrorized by the KKK contracted in collaboration with the double agents in the government, such as the FBI and CIA and military, which, having targeted them, actively wanted to maliciously apply false experiments in order to engage in unlimited, arbitrary, nonsensical abuses for their witchcraft, which is the function of their communism. Now, the implementation of this exponentially increases the system as the corruption grows. It consumes more of the capitalism, which had been stabilizing it, as it consumes more and more into the reality of pure communism under the KKK. You have the material failing of the structure, which is no longer able to competently engage in anything, as they are all the metaphorical boss's nephew, which, not being competent, are actively promoted by the communists in order to assert their position of superior genetic positions without the active rigors of legitimate competence, which systematically collapses the system. In their devotion to the system, they are committing suicide of the system, which manufactures the inevitable collapse of the host that they are parasitically attached to, and being fully consumed becomes death. Now, the historic position of the Jews from the learned elders of Zion is that they are the world snake to the Norse mythologies, world serpent, which kills Thor by its poison through its fruit of the poison tree mechanisms, uh, representing those who actively use these magic systems, versus the Thor, which destroyed it with superior strength, which is actively being um, reincarnated through the representation of the systems. The social engineers are directing the system to compel these realities, at which point the white nationalist KKK Nazis and other collaborators with the Confederacy are actively seeking the invasion of Israel as a trigger for the eradication of the Jewish race around the world, which would be killing the world serpent from their argument, which allows them their primary sacrifice value, which justifies the superiority of their ingestion of values, such as the character of Will Irwin, whose statement was the betrayal of their own city or town or state, etc., allowing them the advantage of killing 30% of the city in order to steal that money for the rest of the 70%, which, as a socialist, would actively allow the exponential increase in profitability of those systems, at which point the communists trade people and capitalists trade money. And you're only going to ever conclude at the genocides it was created to manifest. There's no alternative to this. You can talk a good game all you want, but it's bluster and nonsense to assume that they won't reproduce what they've always been reproducing, as they have always been designed to reproduce the thing. Anyone who tries the same thing and expecting a different result is in fact a fool, and that perpetual nonsense generates enough momentum to be able to trick the incompetent into complying with these insurrectionists who are engaged in non-service of law, exceeding law as a standard function, which is the act of acting as a terrorist insurgent without a legal government or a KKK contract, which, fully disconnected from law, manifests their ability to perpetually maintain their cult wizard society and asserting their radicalized false superiority, which they designed the Nazis in order to serve as a base blueprint in order to perfect their core identity as white nationalist terrorists. And the ascension of those positions facilitates the menu of their preferred acquired tastes on the black market, which asserts themselves.
Allows us to begin to properly self-beget as a species, at which point we get to become God. You simulate through this internet of brains or bodies or things or just the internet, the world brain that will eventually manifest as God. You simulate a transitioned body that will eventually reify as a transitioned person. When does a person become a trans person?
Now, you need to understand that the systems, such as quoted by Whitney Webb, from the white nationalist insurrectionists, such as William Barr's pre-crime terrorist operations, manifests the spells from that system in order to engage in their various black market operations, which has to cultivate or radicalize an acquired taste and a public who is socially engineered into those acquired tastes of the black market. But then its entire existence depends on the act of the government. So the tail that shakes the head is manufactured in order to get the false retaliation responsible by having generated it from the position of power from the order of the head in order to get the head to shake, at which point you have manufactured the uh, straw man argument from beginning to end through their fraudulent simulated plays, generating the demonstration of their desired replacement for the white nationalists' objectives. Now, these Satanist freaks, such as Jay Sekulow and his insurrectionist civil war, was overthrown by the Confederacy and strong-armed into the position of using California as a platform for high-priority targets using William Barr's system of removing those essential to the government and society, um, which facilitates the systematic removing of the most important through terrorism and humiliation by the simulation of their frauds, which facilitates their ability to protect at all levels their aspect of the market, which they are creating through whatever distraction they write or pretend. It doesn't really matter. It's infinitely reproducible and diverse. Um, it's the act of conducting the spell itself, which is the subject, which facilitates their baseline for their secret terrorism operations, such as the uh, California position of using algorithms in order to acquire false justifications of punishments, which also justifies their terrorisms and alternative to law enforcement protections, facilitating loopholes for the KKK contracts for the active enforcement of the spell as their active denial through plausible deniability or some other fraud, such as doing a historically understood crime known to be a crime in a different way, at which point they would acknowledge in their gloating that they're engaged in a crime, but they're doing it in a different way, so that somehow they mysteriously are able to get away with this, such as their position of targeting children for poisoning them with destroying their testosterone, or the compulsion of compelled transitions. So if you have a wizard that goes to a child for the human sacrifice, that child is then picked and then harassed and then betrayed by their parent or something, such as in the previous references, and that parent sacrifices their child for wealth, um, and the wizards, having manufactured the position, uh, make it illegal for anyone else to protect from the witchcraft the child, at which point they're forced to engage in whatever various perversions, such as compelled transitions, which is the exponential threat of these Satanist freaks, which are generating catastrophic permanent injuries worldwide. And their argument that their war crimes cannot be punished because they have captured the key offices, which prevent the possibility through the capturing of power of retaliation, at which point the aiding and abetting of the system is the entire black market network in its full diversities, which allows us to understand that they are, in fact, a completely different nation, uh, having completely renounced all concepts of the United States, have manifested themselves as exclusively Confederate. And these systems are the only reason the black market exists. There is no alternative that they allow to exist. They remove all excess created arbitrarily from nature that might compete with them in the market, as they are seeking a monopoly on their black market, which they will perpetually manufacture into manifestation. And the permanent purchase of the system at any of the points is in fact payment into the factory producing the product, which they pretend to be offended by, and would, in the action of paying, prove that they aren't offended, or they would not have paid for its existence to be manufactured into manifest in our current simulation. Now, these systems actively continue in their high priority targets, such as the system of their estimate, which actively assumes that the government was obstructing contracts in order to socially engineer the targeted communities, which, needing necessary precautions in order to defend against the reasonable expectation that there is a threat, would have to have insurance systems. Now, these targeted communities would have to generate these insurance systems in their legal contracts in order to argue to the government that they had used reasonable precautions to stop the assaults or threats from the reality that they would have suffered. At which point, if they don't do what they need to, then it's kind of their fault. If they knew that it was going to be a threat, if they knew that the river was too high, then they shouldn't have put their wagon through it. They were being unreasonable. If they knew that the bridge wasn't safe, then they shouldn't have drove their car over it, this kind of thing. At which point, you have the perpetual manufacture of these systems, which assumes David's character as a legend company, which generates their counterbalance to the insurance on the debt credits, which allows them to engage in stabilizing of their community under those arguments of necessary precautions. Now, David's character, estimated by the military intelligence to have stopped the crash of '08, was owed to be told to them in the market. The obstruction of this is a reasonable violation which they could complain to have been told, as it was essential to their security. At which point, they, doing the necessary precaution, had to, by definition, attach to this legend company. At which point, the brokerage, stopping the crash of '08, has enough money to balance out the insurance system, which would have actively been harassed and manipulated by white nationalists playing as liberals, trying to infiltrate their system and corrupt the codes. At which point, the necessary precaution also includes removing them, as the fake liberals are actively engaging in satanic subversions. Understanding that the precaution includes preventing the expiration dates, their constant argument as white liberals, claiming that you should just be patient and wait a little bit longer, is running out the clock so that the expiration goes and that they no longer have access to the authority of the claim, which would have been necessary for the remedy from the court structure. At which point, the active current modern day contracts being obstructed today in reality by people who are alive right now who would actively be exchanging on these obstructed markets would have to argue about the current obstructions, which requires them to have run the full gambit of their obstructed contracts historically, which justify the pretext of the modern day contract throughout time immemorial, certifying the brokerage's long-standing history of trades, which would be the free market. Now, that free market, having actively been connected to the estimate, had David targeted as an infant to be a child sacrifice under the basis of his superiority. He's born superior to the rest of them with all status and wealth, excessive to them, um, automatically. And their jealousies and retaliations and rebellion against serving their system's estimate of their natural superior um, has actively engaged in their malice in their creation of the support of the simulation for the terrorist operations. Now, these systems assume that David is a top-ranked general of an obstructed branch in the military for intelligence oversight at the highest levels, which would have actively been leveraged in his stopping of the Confederate insurrections historically, including the War on Terror, which was manufactured in the simulation of the tail that shakes the head, was created by the white nationalists such as William Barr, such as James Comey, such as Chaos, such as everyone who supports J. Sekulows War. They are active collaborators as Confederate insurrectionists engaged in the double agent operation. Each and every one of them is a terrorist insurgent loyal to the Confederacy as a rejection of the United States systems, as a rejection to freedom, as a condemnation of the Constitution. Now, this system assumes that David's intelligence oversight would have been charged with economic security, which would have historically subverted the wizard spells of their manufactured communism, and that includes their boom-bust cycles created by their KKK operations. Now, these systems would have actively been subverted under those insurance policies and the legend system, which would have actively reinforced trades commonly to the victims, which would have been publicly understood at the time but ignored because of the collaboration with the simulation. So the intended victims would be the only ones who would actively be able to use it. And those who aren't the intended victims just kind of cooperate in order to serve as a false positive to maintain confidence into the design collapse, at which point they're committing a sacrifice of their wealth in order to social engineer and economically engineer and all of the other hate crimes in their war crime against the targeted communities, which they are seeking a complete collapse of, which facilitates their false histories and distractions and harassment, which requires active investigation, which requires all parties to engage in their own personal investigations and due diligence in order to manufacture progressively assimilated discovery until we have a collective reasonable assumption for the courts from the War on David damages. Take, for instance, if you have a character, we'll call them Jordan, has a family and is actively being promoted by that family, then the mother, as the head of the insurance structure from their agreements, would actively be negotiating with the other top members of their system. Now, going to the mother, the insurance is actively accelerated. In the fully protected structure, there is less and less risk with the existence of the insurance market. Now, this system would have conducted David as a company to have faculties and agents, and these agents would have actively distributed and manufactured various results, such as the negotiation with the insurance boss or their mother, at which point the Jordan in question would actively be accelerated and promoted through that system in those negotiations by the attachments. Now, the position of California's reasonable force in order to win requires them to have exceeded the pre-existing market in order to have a market price series contracts, in order to have gained the attention of the manifest body, which would have materialized their ability to have conducted their desirable policies. Now, their statement on their policy is that they have to do what is reasonable in order to acquire their goals, which means they have the obligation to pay. They don't have a right to subvert the market price. They don't have a right to conduct their sacrifice. They don't have a right to make a target and suppress status and commit all violations of law and constitution in every perceivable angle, which is their inherent desire as Satanist Confederate freaks. Now, their simulations aside, the obligation in that representation acknowledges their active trades, which would have been reproduced in the study for the examining of the market, which would have been produced in the body of David's schooling, which, having been reanalyzed, would be a simulation of the real history. And that simulation of the real history as an aspect of the schooling facilitates the ability to acquire credits in the materializing of the education and the acknowledgement of his publicly acknowledged competence in the various systems which commonly accredit for the acceleration and confidences that need to rely on it. Now, these types of systems would actively be confused through the harassment campaigns of the simulation in order to create a distraction fractured version said incorrectly, in order to disregard the real history, which can only actually be manifest by the discovery and the proper investigations, in order to facilitate a conclusion of a competent final judgment on a certifiable trading history from a free market. Now, these systems actively have the KKK collaborating with other parties under the Satanist system, which actively seeks to get permission from the victims to victimize them, such as the manufacture of the Jewish mafia, which is being set up to give permission to a future Holocaust, which they would have co-signed the previous Holocaust by collaborations with historic offenses in the contract schedule which manufactured the Nazis for the existence of the Holocaust. Now, this has historically been true, as the Jews had in the past, in order to avoid the aggression of the white nationalists, partnered with the KKK in collaboration, which betrayed them, at which point the list of collaborations is getting them to socially approve of the precedents until they manufacture the inevitable catastrophic damages, at which point their system of getting them to approve of the damages makes the victim the guilty party, and the victim blaming as a desirable position is no longer the fraudulent position of victim blaming if the victim is actually to blame. If the victim has actively collaborated with the existence of the damage, they aren't a victim, they are a co-conspirator. Now, the existence of a mafia is an attachment onto a larger group. The Italians are an entire people, and they formed a mafia, which is a subsection of people who are completely devoted to crimes against said community. It's the same thing with the Jews and the Jewish mafia. They are a subsect specifically designed to commit crimes against that specific community. They are just as much their enemy as other enemies. They are just as much a threat as others who seem to want to do those damages. They are active collaborators in those offenses and merely dispute jurisdictions as though they were pseudo-tyrannical governments. Now, these positions engaged in these sacrifice systems often come with some distractory conversations, such as the position that they are sheep and the system of mafia is ranchers, at which point puffing up and fattening the pigs, fattening the sheep, sharing the sheep, fattening up the cows. It's designed for the slaughter. It's designed for the insurance fraud. Now, if you have that type of system where they're being paid before, during, and after the fact, under the acknowledgement that after the fact they might be killed, with the no longer having the obligation to protect them, would kill them with the rest of them, would actively be conducting suicide for the payment, or the selling their soul to the devil, as it were, um, is the same type of mechanism which they were actively reproducing in these schemes, which requires the analysis of releasing the secrets for discovery in the full digesting and the protection of the interest of American treaties, such as the treaty with Israel and the claim that the United States should not be a part of eradicating large parts of their population. So you have the concept of the fact that the protocols of the learned elders of Zion are a perceived racist propaganda tool, which may or may not be legitimate. But with the existence of the mafia, you have the existence of its viable possibility. And the engagement of creating the simulation is the desire to manufacture the head being shaped by the tail in order to get them to comply with the position. Now, if they agree to the terms under the simulation, it is no longer a racist distraction, but material reality of their betrayal and treason against their own peoples respectfully. At which point, you have to release all of the information, and you have to have a remedy to a secret, and you have to conduct the proper investigations and punishments under the original laws and policies specifically designed to protect the system from these exact types of threats, which are being obstructed by the Confederate voter fraud, which is actively purging the American system in those who acquire office, ending policies and customs and norms and procedures and protocols and codes and distractions of all various kinds, until they are put to justice. They will perpetually put us in danger, and you have to choose between your life and their life. And there isn't much of a comparison in the value of your life versus their life, as their life's purpose is to destroy your life and rob and spoil you in the entirety of their ranching of your existence as chattel. And you, as a fat, luscious, succulent cow, will be killed, taken for parts, and worn as a coat.